tasteful dinner with chicken biryani and delicious ice cream for novices with great joy, affection, simplicity, and hospitality. That provincial superior is none other than our beloved, most Reverend Joseph Raja, the Bishop of Vijayawada, speaker of this session, as said in this morning by our Superior General, a spiritual gift for Montfortians from the Holy See in the year of Tercentenary year, a pride of Montfortians like Diba, Sakshi, Sindhu in Rio Olympics for us Indians. Pulled by the conviction that Jesus was calling him to join a congregation, Bishop joined Montfort missionaries in 1975 after his philosophy at St. Peter's Pontifical Seminary, Bangalore, and began his Montfortian journey. He did his theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome. He made his first profession in 1976, solemn profession on 31st of January 1918, and was ordained a priest on 7th June 1980. For years, he had involved in the formation process as a formator, vocation promoter, professor of theology and scripture, and in leadership as major superior. He had been very active in preaching. He was director of the new foundation of Hospital of Mercy, Rome, and was director of Anugraha Institute for Poor Children and of Montfort Marian Center, Bangalore. He also served as the vice president of the National CRI and attorney general and postulator of the congregation Montfort in Rome, apart from serving as provincial councillor, and he headed the Montfort Fathers in India as provincial superior from 1990 to 1997, and was serving again as provincial when he was elected as the Bishop of Vijayawada. The topic for this presentation this evening is Montfort, a mystic and a prophet. Logically, it's a contradiction, a confusion, and there is a conflict in this description of the personality. But as a consolation, as it was said this morning by the Assistant General of the Montfort Fathers, inviting us to recall a person who has made significant contribution in your life, and I straight from my mind thought of Brother Lawrence, who was my novice master, and I console because he used to say, Montfort is a peculiar person. And such a wisdom from a walking dictionary on Montfort is a consolation for us till this moment. As true sons and daughters of our founder, Father Saint Montfort, we too, Montfortians, are experts in creating confusion, crisis, conflicts, and no cross, what a cross is our inspiration. Friends, I invite and welcome Right Reverend Dr. Joseph Raja, the Bishop of Vijayawada, a true and authentic Montfortian, to add a bit more to this confusion, or as an expert to bring in clarity by his presentation on the topic Montfort as a mystic and a prophet. over to our beloved Bishop.
When you're all saying that, yes, I don't feel I'm so big. Brother John and dear brothers and fathers and sisters and dear friends of Montfortians, I know it is 5 o'clock and many are wishing to have a break now rather than to sit here and listen to another talk. So I shall try to be as precise as possible and as clear as possible on this topic, Montfort, mystic and prophet. Some people have a misconception that mysticism and misconception, and they begin to think mysticism begins in mist and ends in schism. So it is not true. It doesn't begin in mist and it doesn't end in schism, but it begins in love and ends in love, ends in more love. So, but mysticism is in vogue today. Many are looking for a mystical way of life, a contemplative life. Into Great Silence was the film about contemplation, silence, and time in a Carthusian monastery. It played to packed house in so-called secular Europe, so which is a sign of spiritual hunger. On one hand, there are not many vocations to active religious life, but for contemplative life, there are many, many vocations. Educated people, most people have a lot of culture, culturally prepared people, they join these monasteries. And that's why at the very origin of every religion, there is a mystical experience. A religion without mystical depth is no religion at all, for it fails to bind the believers with God at an experiential level. And Saint Thomas Aquinas reminds us, we hand on what we contemplate. Contemplata alis tradere. And Matthew Fox, one of the modern theologians, insists that our first task is not to redeem people from sin, but to reveal the divine mysteries to them. And Bede Griffith, who has lived in an ashram in India since 1955, has argued that Christianity must recover and nurture its mystical tradition, or it has nothing to offer to the world. As the oft-cited quote of Karl Rahner, famous theologian, reminds us that the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. So when we look at today's pastoral situation and the spiritual thirst of the people, we must realize that teaching about mysticism and mystical practice has been very rare during the modern period of church history. So the void is filled by groups like charismatic movement and new age movement in modern times. If you go to pastoral field, wherever we go, this charismatic movement is very vogue. Everyone is wanting to join there. If you go into the church, Catholic church, you only hear about Alleluia, people chanting Alleluia, praise the Lord and all that. They shout because they are looking for experiential side of the religion. And the reason was, in the past few years, the emphasis has been on the accuracy of theological and ethical statements about elaborate ritual performances and well-organized administrative structures which cannot transform the lives of the people unless they are nourished by the hidden streams of mystical experience. With this background, to emphasize the importance of mysticism to the modern times, we shall now explore within our possibility into the life and works of Montfort to see his own mystical experience and how it helped him to carry on his prophetic mission. What is mystical experience? It is a direct experience of God. It is a kind of knowing which goes beyond intellectual understanding. It is freely and directly given by God without any manipulation from the side of the subject. Rob Faison, one of the professors from Leuven, defines mysticism as an immediate passive experience of the presence of God. Immediate means directly, passive, that means I am on the receiving end, I am not the one who causing it. The immediate passive experience of the presence of God. Bernard McGinn, an authority in the field, further perfects the definition by saying that Christian mysticism is the consciousness or awareness of the presence or the absence of God. So the choice of the words by McGinn, awareness and consciousness, and not experience or knowledge, they seem very appropriate. It is not the sensation of God as an external object in prayer or contemplation, but more importantly, a consciousness of God's presence at work in our lives. That presence of God at work in one's lives. So mystical contemplation should lead a person to new ways of loving, new ways of knowing, based on states of awareness in which God becomes present in our inner acts. So God is not an object to be dissected in laboratory of prayer, but a person who comes to us and shares his life with us. It is not a magical moment when grand visions and miraculous apparitions occur, for they seldom transpire except for some extraordinary cases. It is a moment when God, in all simplicity and gentleness, comes to us and becomes part of us. A true mystic, in the proper sense of the term, is someone who is transformed by God's love. He is the mystic. He is not the one who is magical. No, there is no magic there. Someone who is transformed by the love of God. Sheer love of God. One who receives. And the same love, by its very nature, transform this person radically. Day by day, she or he learns a new dimension and the art of living, and the person does not grow weary, regretful, or grumpy. So Bernard McGinn adds that the only test that Christianity has known for determining the authenticity of a mystic and her or his message has been that of personal transformation, both on the mystic's part and especially on the part of those whom the mystic has affected, both on his part as well as on those people with whom others are living, with whom others have any relation. So it is difficult to define mysticism or its experience, for it goes beyond rituals or belief. To express this, the biblical authors as well as the spiritual writers through the ages use metaphors such as that of wine and the branches, describing how one's union with God, remain in me as I in you, brings about fruitfulness in the mission. From the Gospels we see how the disciples in the early church came to realize more profoundly the inextricable relationship between contemplation and action, between mysticism and prophecy. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul reached the mystic state of losing his self when he testified, saying, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. This is but the beginning of many other testimonies in the early church. Every century has been influenced by Christian mystics telling us that mystical experiences are available to anyone. They are not reserved for the privileged few. It is available for everyone, every ordinary person, every baptized person who is disposed to love God, who is disposed to be loved by God. This mystical experience is available. But many of these experiences simply come and go and are not translated into prophetic action, because without the lasting experience of God, mysticism loses its prophetic edge. You see that how mysticism gives us a prophetic edge. Without that experience, that God experience, that direct experience, that passive experience, a prophet loses that prophetic edge, that he cannot be sharp. He cannot be that rugged prophet. For example, when especially when Amos was challenged by Ananias, and this man says, I was a dresser of the sycamore trees, and I was doing my work, but God took me, he says, laka, the Hebrew word, God took me, just like God took Abraham. He took me. So there he says, therefore, since God took me and made me a prophet, you better listen, not I should listen to you, not the contrary, you better listen. So his prophetic edge, that rugged prophet, he says that God took me, therefore I have become a prophet. So here the same thing, the mystical experience, it sharpens the edge of the prophetic edge of a person. So the Pentecost experience loosened the tongues of the disciples, both men and women, to proclaim the power of God in their lives and in history, impelling them to go out and fear no longer in proclaiming the good news and in giving witness to the Spirit of Jesus to peoples and in places needing God's healing and transforming message. So we can therefore say that Christian mysticism and Christian mystical experience is about the transforming union, finding its deepest expression in the following of Christ in prophetic witness and mission. And the most characteristic form of religious experience in the Bible, as Martin Buber pointed out, is not realization or rapture, but vocation and mission. That's it. That's why a call to be a mystic and a call, the mission to be a prophet. It is one and the same. They are not two different things. Two are one preparing for the other. That's why Buber says that it's not the realization, the most characteristic form of religious experience in the Bible is not realization or rapture or some kind of elevation or some kind of mystical phenomena, but vocation and mission. You are called to someone, you are called to do something, you are called to be someone. This is what. So that's why when we are talking about this mysticism, the Damascus experience of St. Paul could not simply be preserved as a memory of Paul's conversion to Christ, but that very same incident which invaded Paul made him to confess in his powerful statements, I no longer live, but Christ who lives in me. And immediately he says in 1 Corinthians, woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel. That is the mission. The first is that his being, the first is his vocation. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. He's called to allow himself be filled by Christ. The second thing is his work. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. So it is there, the vocation and mission. And that's why the two dimensions of the mystic and the prophet, they come together. So mystical experience and prophecy should not be considered as two separate, independent, unrelated callings, but one leading to the other and sharpening it to deliver the full message. We have scores of examples to this effect throughout the Bible. Isaiah chapter 6, Jeremiah chapter 1, Ezekiel chapter 1, Jesus' examples to this effect throughout, and then Jesus, his own experience at the baptism, Apostles Peter, James and John, and Mount Tabor. And then Paul, Damascus experience, Lydia in the Acts of the Apostles. All these people, they have these experiences. They are called and they see, they have an experience, and then they go out authentically to be the prophets. The best way to speak of mysticism is to understand it is a process. It is not that one experience just comes and goes away. It is a process. We are growing. The person grows to be a mystic. The person prepares himself to be a prophet. The mystical experience prepares the person to be a prophet. So it is not all of a sudden experience just happening there and going away. No, the impact remains, and that becomes a process of transformation for the person. So the best way to speak of mysticism is to understand is a process which involves a deep spiritual conversion. A person gradually becomes. There's no need of forcing someone to become a mystic. There's no need of someone, sometimes, some people, when they go to charismatic prayer, some are, singing in tongues, and some other ask you, come on, you too sing, you too sing. Then one of our fathers went there and he was participating in the charismatic prayer, and then one who could not sing, he began to, while others are singing in tongues, he began to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it is not something to be induced. It's not like that. It is not like that. It is something organic. It is a process. It grows naturally according to our capacity. Because we cannot contain God if He gives us all of a sudden Himself. We cannot. That's why He knows what to give, whom to give, how to give, when to give. That's why a person, all that is needed from the part of the person, the disposition. So this process is more complex than it is often perceived, as it is not once and for all kind of experience. It is in fact ongoing, a lifetime process of deepening one's baptismal commitment and witnessing to it. The complexity is to be found principally in the fact that conversion occurs in several phases or stages. It's not continual, but it occurs in several phases. Montfort lived in the 17th century France and in the first few years of 18th century. And this milieu where he lived, as we have seen this morning presentation by Father Peter, he lived his first 30 years of life was a very religious type. From when we look at about his religious side of France was very conducive for Montfort to grow. In analyzing these first 30 years of Montfort's life, it is helpful to keep in mind the organic nature of mysticism in general and of its development in the life of Grignon de Montfort in particular. There is no question here of merely cataloguing a few sporadic incidents that might be considered mystical. During Grignon de Montfort's childhood, his family environment, the structure of rural French society, and the diocesan programs of the local church all conspired to give him a God-centered orientation. God was the center of his life. Many of the childhood games that he played with his sister were directed toward greater openness to God and growth in the experience of God's presence. Accounts of his early childhood are unanimous in stressing his childhood predisposition to prayer in solitude and with others. As a student at the college in Rennes, Grignon received a unique orientation to an unusually intense degree of Christian life and prayer. His openness to his Jesuit mentors in the spiritual life, his regularity in prayer at the church in Rennes, his devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, his involvement in active works of charity, and his appreciation of the missionary orientation and work of Father Julien Bellier synthesize the salient aspects of his spiritual journey during these years. His contemporaries, and in particular John Baptist Blaine, bear witness to Grignon's prolonged periods of prayer during this period of adolescence and hint at moments of deep consolation and spiritual delight similar to those described by Teresa of Avila regarding souls who have reached the fourth set of dwelling places, the fourth mansion in her book. The symbolic gesture at the bridge of Cesson underscores Louis Marie's decision to follow the gospel radically and to become in due course a missionary to the poor of the country. Recently I was talking to Provincial of France, Montfort, Olivier. He doesn't agree there existed Cesson Bridge incident. He doesn't agree. saying that Bernard doesn't mention in his biography about it. So I was a bit disturbed when he said that. How is it? Because we made lots of study about it. Whereas other biographers speak about it, but Bernard doesn't mention about it, and Olivier hangs on towards saying that it doesn't exist, somebody else made it up, he said. But for me, it has a very deep spiritual meaning here. So the symbolic gesture at the bridge of Cesson underscores Louis Marie's decision to follow the gospel radically and to become in due course a missionary to the poor of the country. There is no doubt that he felt God's call to intimacy very deeply and consequently embarked on a process of renunciation, which is unanimously seen by experts on mysticism as a prerequisite step to higher states of contemplation. In his quest for absolute renunciation of self, he enlisted the help of tried and true methods: mortification of the senses, imagination, mortification of the will, entrusting himself to the passive purification sent by the divine providence, and humble obedience to his spiritual directors. All through his life at St. Sulpice, his heart followed the intuitions of his deeper spirit. When, as often happened, his last two spiritual directors, Lesassier and Brenier, failed to understand him, he described his inner struggle as a kind of new martyrdom. A new martyrdom, yet submitted himself cheerfully to these two directors. What mattered most to him in the course of his seminary years was to make his will one with the will of God, so that he would become the person that God intended him to be. When you read especially the biography of Montfort, written by Papasoli and others, when you encounter what happened to Montfort during his seminary days, the way that people tried to, the two directors, they tested him, he said, but what are they doing? Are they spiritual directors? These people? Are they spiritual directors? Or somebody else? Because they failed to understand him. They failed to understand him. But Montfort all the time just kneeling down, just submitting his will. He does not say a word in return. Sometimes at the end, I was asking while doing my research, and why? What is the problem with these people? And my director told me the reason is that these people could not understand Montfort, because he was going completely a different direction, especially in the line of submitting himself to God and finding God's will and submitting himself. And these people, on the other hand, they are completely on different level altogether. And finally, they didn't understand him at all. They were lost. They were lost. Both of them were lost. Even during his seminary years, the fruits of his life of prayer and contemplation are very clear. He always dealt with the poor with a deep respect, considering them a privileged means of encounter with Christ. His ministry of the Word of God, in catechizing the street urchins of Paris, and in his discourses to his fellow seminarians were extraordinarily powerful, so much so that his directors and fellow seminarians were at loss to explain his compelling impact on hearts and souls. His extraordinary experience of mystical prayer in the crypt of the Cathedral of Chartres is the best documented source of the intensity and depth of Grignon's prayer life. It is highly unlikely that this experience came out of the blue. It could not come like that. Surely it was the culmination of many years of fidelity to contemplative prayer. In the end, even Lesassier, the most cautious of spiritual directors, was of the opinion that Grignon de Montfort had reached a high degree of union. Soon after his priestly ordination, through many letters, he wrote to his spiritual director, reveal his anguished search for his personal identity as priest identity. We know about his experience in the community of St. Clement in Nantes, and from there he paved his way for his subsequent entry into the poorhouse of Poitiers in 1701. There he initiated reforms that made him quite unpopular with the officialdom. But it was there also he began to explore his particular way of living his priesthood and witnessing to the love of God. Something virtually unique in the 18th century Europe began to grow in him. his love for wisdom, and his intuitive insight into the intimate relationship between wisdom and the cross. Not only did he make this the foundation of his mystical journey, his mystical itinerary, but he also saw it as the spirituality tailored for his humble foundation, the embryo of a new religious congregation of the Daughters of Wisdom. Upon leaving Poitiers, Louis-Marie hoped to continue to serve the poor with an even larger institution of the same type, the Salpêtrière in Paris. But from this post also he was eventually dismissed, for it was in the crucible of the excruciating pain of abandonment and rejection that the young priest was prepared to enter one of the most powerful experiences of his life. In a humble room under a staircase at the Rue des Portes de Fer, he endured complete abandonment by friend and foe alike, and so entered the darkest period of his spiritual life. This moment is the key experience in the mystical journey of the young priest when we look at it through the lens of the passive night of the senses. The fact that he received no help from any human source is reflected in his anguished cry in a letter written to his faithful disciple, Marie-Louise. "My only refuge is God. For all those who knew me in this great city of Paris have abandoned me, completely alone, lonely." Yet from this experience was born one of the two undoubted masterpieces of his life. From this period dates his profound meditation on wisdom entitled The Love of Eternal Wisdom. Not only does this little masterpiece reveal the fire and passion of his mystical experience, but also it points the way to the message of God's love that was to become the hallmark of his missions. Rendered utterly passive through the night of the senses, Montfort became progressively and unreservedly open to God's will. Inwardly strengthened by the experience of the night experience of abandonment, experience of being lonely, there was nobody for him except God, Montfort still longed for an outward verification of a vocation to the foreign missions. Thus, he decided to go on foot all the way to Rome to seek the mandate from the reigning pontiff Clement XI. The latter, impressed by the young priest's evident sincerity and order, named him apostolic missionary not to China, not to Canada, but to the western part of his own native land, at that time threatened by both Gallicanism and Jansenism. For Montfort, the mandate of the Pope, somebody is talking, I am being disturbed. Yeah, if they can stop talking, please. మాట్లాడబాకండి ఎవరు దయచేసి ఎవరు మాట్లాడకూడదు. Okay? For Montfort, the mandate of the Pope was perceived as the mandate of Christ himself. From 1706, the year of his pilgrimage to Rome, to 1716, the year of his death, he never again struggled with doubts about the way in which he was called to live out his priestly vocation. Now, at first, he worked with the missionary team of the renowned Father Louis de Guerre, but later went away from the group to strike out on his own. In the diocese of Nantes, the young apostolic missionary began to spread his wings. When, however, Montfort erected at Pontchâteau a monumental Calvary destined to become an unprecedented pilgrimage center, he incurred the enmity of the powerful seneschal of the Duke of Guazelin, who managed to have the Calvary condemned by a royal edict of Louis XIV himself. Montfort's tremendous symbol of faith of the people was eventually razed to the ground. Once again, William de Montfort underwent a prolonged and paradoxical period of unutterable suffering and serene prayer. Using certain indices supplied by eyewitness accounts of his reactions, this incident must be examined through the lens of passive night of the spirit. His reaction to the message communicated to him by the bishop was a prolonged initiation into the depths of the will of God. Moreover, from this period onward, there is a marked emergence in Montfort of gentleness, of integration, and the power to move hearts more than ever. Gone is his aggressive behavior. Gone his violent confrontation with the provocative singers, dancers, soldiers, and gamblers. Gone are many of these kind of behaviors. More than ever, the poor begin to acclaim him as the good Father de Montfort. When I was doing my thesis, I had conflict with my director. And when we spoke about Pop de Fer, he said, "This is the spiritual marriage. This is the mystical experience. Finish it." I said, "No, sorry." I said, wait, Father. I have different opinion than you," I said. Father Stefano, he died now. He is in heaven, Father Stefano. Then I said, it is not there. You must see, if a mystic is a mystic, it is not just merely his struggle and then he has some kind of struggle. The struggle becomes a cross for him. In the cross, he meets Jesus. That is not the end of it. More than that, aftermath of that, he must show concretely in his behavior his transformation, inner transformation. And if it is the Pop de Fer, if you stop there, Montfort did not have any experience at all. After Pontchâteau, you must see, in Pontchâteau, after Pontchâteau experience, he had a lot of big plans, and he was sure that it's going to be a great pilgrimage center. And in no moment it was razed to the ground. On the day they said they are going to put it, 14th of September, they're going to inaugurate it. Then the army comes, destroys it, razes to the ground. And Montfort, he walks whole night and goes to the Bishop of Poitiers to find out what to do with this. He said, "Nothing, we can do nothing." And Montfort withdraws himself. The whole thing, whole hype comes down. Then what was the reaction of Montfort? His companion goes to him and says, "I thought by now you would die. You would be panting, you would be weeping, you would be shouting, you would be completely distressed." He says, "No, not true," he says, "not true. I'm okay. If that's what God wanted, let him take. Let him take." And that reaction of Montfort was important to discover his mystical experience. And soon after 1710, there is a complete change in the attitude, in the behavior of Montfort. The man, until then, he could not see he would not speak easily with the rich people. And especially when they were building the Calvary, there were some fashionable women came along with the officials to check how things were going. And he did not even talk to them. He showed them his back. And with that, they were more irritated because of his behavior. And they went there and they wrote a very bad report, and then the army was sent and everything was destroyed. But after that, he becomes the friend of the doctors, and he finally becomes the friend of the rich people. He becomes the friend of the beggars. More and more, he is called the loving Father Montfort, the loving Father Montfort, and becomes very, 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 very close. And also the way that he addresses the daughters of wisdom, in those days he was calling once a week. Poor Marie-Louise Trichet all the time was desiring to see him, to speak to him. Then he would begin to write more letters. The tone is different now. "Come soon, I want you to come, I want you to take up this work, I want to take up that work." It becomes very human, very human. The whole experience, this experience of God had changed him. His attitudes have changed. It was no more before. Before he was just going like very, very, he was believing his own self, with that sort of impulsive behavior. He would not intolerant. Montfort was very intolerant. Dancers, singers, and the people, soldiers, was very hard on them. But after this, he mellows down. That's why I told my director, "Father, you must consider Montfort after Pontchâteau incident, and then only we know the fruits of his mystical experience. We should not remain only at Rudy Poddi for experience of his loneliness and experience of God. After that, what happened to him? And that's why, in conversion experience, this is what happens to us. It should not remain as a sporadic incident, remaining there, but from there, the fruit should flow into the life of a person. And those fruits will change the character of a person. And that's why when we have, especially when we make the journey as novices, when we enter into the seminary, when we enter the congregation, and when we are faithfully responding to God's call, if we are very faithful, sometimes we receive what we call initial touches from God. Initial touches means when you are praying, you feel like praying. And when you are praying, you feel like praying more and more, more and more. Sometimes God gives us many, many beautiful experiences. But if you let those experiences go without deepening them and consequently making changes in our behavior to become gentle, poor, Christ-like, it's only then, because of such kind of response from us, God continues to give us more and more, and mystical experience becomes possible for us. We are not manipulating, but we are only paving way, we are responding to it. And that's why I said mystical experience is possible for everybody. Not necessarily only a kind of banging experience like Paul. That is also mystical experience, but Paul continued with that experience. So he also continued with this experience. So once again, moreover, from his poetry and other writings, it is possible to discern qualities described by Saint Teresa as the consequences of spiritual marriage. Not only are these evident in Montfort's writings, but also they are mirrored in his character and behavior. Although his transformation occurs gradually, all through the years from 1706 to 1716, hundreds of people along the way bore witness to extraordinary phenomena in the life of Montfort. Finally, in the Diocese of La Rochelle, during the last 5 years of his life, he worked incessantly, preaching parish missions, composing the rule for missionaries, and pleading with God for a poor and small company of priests who will later be called the Company of Mary. Also, during these last years of his life, he wrote his second masterpiece, the Treatise on True Devotion to Mary, which symbolizes admirably not only his entire spirituality, but also a life that constituted a continuous dialogue between mysticism and mission. On examining Montfort's two principal treatises, that is, The Law of Eternal Wisdom and True Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, all external and internal evidence suggests that both these treatises were composed during a period of intense contemplative prayer in Montfort's life. Although it is not possible to prove either the authenticity or the degree of author's mystical experience, the testimony of witnesses and the quality of the works themselves support the assumption that each of them had its source in the consciousness of a genuine mystic. In both treatises, the primary goal is not atonement for sin. It was not. Montfort does not speak about it. But the invitation to a loving relationship with God. That is his motive. That's what he insists. Not the atonement of sin, but invitation to a loving relationship, even so far as to the attainment of exalted degrees of union with God. Montfort's pastoral goal was the personal holiness for those to whom he preached. By holiness, he understood profound union with God, because the fullness of the Godhead can never be contained within the limits of scholastic definition. Montfort most often, but not always, expresses that union in Trinitarian terms. At its center is the goal of union with Jesus, Son of God, who leads one to the Father to the extent that one is faithful to the Spirit. At other times, however, Montfort expresses the experience of the unitive state in terms of the wisdom paradigm. Union with God is mentioned more often than either of the above, but always as a short and easy path to union with Christ, the wisdom of God, who leads one ultimately to the Father. If not unique in his approach, Montfort certainly represents the view of very few contemporaneous preachers' view in his conviction that the inward reception and outward expression of the theological, cardinal, and moral virtues flow from mystical experience, not the other way about. One does not achieve the unitive state by determined efforts in the practice of the virtues, rather by the practice of the presence of God and by contemplation of the mysteries, one is drawn into the experience of God as beloved. Union with God, in whatever degree, creates a qualitative transformation in one's way of being, from which flows the authentic expression of virtue in one's relationship of everyday life. This is why, to a remarkable degree, Montfort's missionary praxis fostered the practice of the presence of God. Not only personal holiness, but also apostolic zeal and holiness issue from the same authentic mystical experience. Montfort was fully aware of the dependence of the efficacy of the word on one's profound experience of union with God. Perceived by all his contemporaries, even his enemies, as a fiery apostle of true wisdom and fearless opponent of false wisdoms, Montfort insisted during his whole lifetime that apostolic zeal is a natural outcome of unitive experience. If he has more zeal, it is just because he is completely united with God. An easy way to persevere in one's call to holiness is the consecration, according to Montfort, which Montfort preached and recommended both for the simple and the learned, was nothing short of a stroke of genius. He was able to communicate important features of the mystical path in an uncomplicated and realistic way. Montfort taught the people to have recourse to Mary by adding a contemplative dimension to the recitation of the Rosary, and also by reciting the consecration prayer daily and then using its short formula as a kind of mantra during the day, as a way of maintaining complete awareness of the goal, deep and authentic union with God in this and in the life to come. When we depict Montfort as a prophet for our times, we have a modern understanding of who a prophet is. Etymologically, prophet is the one who speaks in the name of God. A prophet is part of the people to whom he or she is sent, nurtured from birth in the religious and social wisdom of that people, product of its history, participant in its prayer, inheritor of its dreams, victim of and sometimes even sharer in its sins and errors, society's sins and errors. It is because the prophet is one with the people that he or she can speak of this people to God and for God to this people, says Sandra Schneiders. In this perspective, Montfort does fit in to be called a prophet in our times because of his God-orientedness, centrality of Christ in his life, his configuration with Christ from the perspective of the cross and wisdom, Mary as the guiding principle, working with the poorest of the poor without neglecting the other classes. Every time a mystic goes through a stage of mystical experience, she sharpens that prophetic edge with much more evangelical radicalism. Right from the start of his early days, Montfort cared for the people, at home for his brothers and sisters, especially with his sister Guillaume Jeanne, his poor companion at St. Thomas Becket's school at Rennes, for whom he bought the dress, the old lady at a hospital at Rennes, the prophetic gesture at Sessom Bridge, the street urchins in Paris, the poor at various public places in Nantes, Poitiers, Paris, the sick, the beggars, the famous Dinah incident of the open the door to Jesus Christ, and many other examples. In fine, the two dimensions of mysticism and prophecy cannot be separated. For a person grows in this consciousness and awareness, one strengthening the other. In both respects, it is God who takes the initiative and makes one a mystic and makes one a prophet. We can find in Montfort's mysticism the dimensions of the cross, the dimensions of wisdom, Mary, providence, and together they prepare him for an authentic prophetic action. However, I would like to make two concluding remarks. One, Montfort is the mystic of the permanent presence of Jesus and Mary. Because I spoke about mysticism as the presence. He had made this confession. One problem with Montfort is Montfort did not write an autobiography. That's why he doesn't share personally his God experience. That's why we need to decipher, read, and sometimes he speaks in the third person, and whatever he speaks in the third person, I think he humbly is putting his own experience in the third person. That's why we have to decipher that way. So, somehow in one instance he speaks about his experience. He had made this confession to his childhood friend Blaine. During the talk I had, I'm quoting, during the talk I had with him, he told me that God granted him a very special grace. which was the continuous presence of Jesus and Mary in the depth of his soul. Continuous presence of Jesus and Mary in the depth of his soul. The same he repeats at the moment of his death. I am between Jesus and Mary, and I will sin no more. Both Grande and Blaine give many instances where he felt the presence of Jesus and Mary. That is my first conclusion, that he is the mystic of the permanent presence of Jesus and Mary. Second one, Montfort is an ordinary mystic. He is not extraordinary mystic. Extraordinary mystics are those who have lots of extraordinary phenomena, levitations, then maybe bilocation, trilocations, then maybe stigmata, then miraculous powers. Lots of these phenomena existed, but they are not prominent. Soon after his death, when depositions were collected, Bernard and others, they collect lots of depositions, and lots of miracles were reported to them. But we do not much concentrate on that. But he is an ordinary mystic, is the one who lives and acts in the awareness of God's presence in his daily life without being extraordinary. Just lives. God is there in God's presence. One spends his life and leads others to the same experience. Montfort led such life and taught people to live in that presence through the simple practice of devotion to Mary as the shortest, surest, easiest, and the most perfect way to God. The mystical path he taught was to do everything in, through, with, for Mary. And for Montfort, Mary was the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. And where there is Mary, there is the fullness of the Spirit. Mystical life is the supreme gift of the Holy Spirit. And Mary is the mold of the Spirit, where Jesus was brought forth. It is through the same mold we will be configured into the likeness of Jesus. Mary has the role of mediatrix in our complete transformation into the likeness of Jesus. This is the best way to understand the mystical process taught and lived by Montfort. Montfort is a genuine mystic with a deep consciousness of the presence of God, and he is a prophet with an extraordinary zeal to bring everyone into the embrace of God's love. In Love of Eternal Wisdom number 8, he says, God is not loved because he is not known. So he sets himself to bring everybody to the embrace of this Father, whom he knows as unfailing Father. As a mystic, he loves the poor, and as a prophet, he works for the poor. As a mystic, he loves the poor, and as a prophet, he works for the poor. Mystic prophet is a new paradigm which everyone wants to appropriate. Everyone wants to become both a mystic and a prophet. It's a new paradigm, and all of us can appropriate it. We all have these two calls within us, and Montfort encourages us to acquire them by letting ourselves into the providence of the Father. Thank you. Thank you.
Montfort as a mystic and a prophet, and our beloved bishop has beautifully concluded saying, as a mystic, Montfort is a lover of the poor, and as a prophet, he prefers to work for the poor. And my understanding, my confusion, my consolation, which was still today on Montfort as a peculiar person, believing the words of Brother Lawrence, as after listening to our beloved bishop, has changed and have grown in reverence and admiration for Montfort as a prophet and a mystic. So thank you very much, dear Bishop, for this wonderful presentation, very meaningful and inspirational presentation. I don't know whether we have time to interact and then ask or clarify or share your concept or clarify certain things from the expert bishop in terms of the mysticism and the propheticism of our founding father. So maybe a few questions.
It's more sharing and a clarification. It's not exactly a question. I was very happy to hear the Bishop saying that a mystic is necessarily a prophet and a prophet is necessarily a mystic. He did not use the same wording, but that is what it meant. And he quoted Karl Rahner that if today's Christian is not a mystic, is nothing at all. Now my question is, if today's Montfortan is not a mystic, what is he? I was very glad to listen to the 10 points of our Superior General's proposition as an action plan. I want to top that 10 list with this, that every Montfortian present here from today onwards decide to be a mystic and then be a prophet. Thank you.
A true prophet is necessarily a true mystic. That's how, from the depth of his experience, from the abundance of his experience, flows out his action. And today we see a lot of action being done. Among Montfortans, we are involved in massive activism, and then I'm afraid that we lack, there is an emptiness that probably we are not able to, or we are afraid to recognize. And Montfort had a lot of people helping him to experience that emptiness by way of torturing him, by way of isolating him, by way of disowning him. Probably, are we missing such people? Maybe we may have to think.
To receive such treatment, mystics are supposed to receive such treatment, but some troubles, they come from, not from our mistakes, they come from outside. And they stand as a test for us to test maybe our capacity to love. And they are called passive night of the spirit. That means they are not provoked by you, or they are not your actions. They are they're coming from outside, and how you are dealing with them. That's one way of looking at it. And all these things, they begin to actually purify us more and more. And when we are completely purified without any trace of egoism in us, then we are capable of loving God truly. So I don't say that everyone will have this sort of challenges as Montfort had, but these are all experiences of purification. But say the whole problem with the mysticism is maybe vocabulary. That's what. I myself in the beginning, when I was making study of this one, I used to get quite confused with this. But at the end I found it is very simple. The simple is that if any person who enters into prayer experience, and in the prayer experience, usually we begin to work on we have the knowledge of ourselves, and slowly we begin to work on us. And then sometimes we entrust ourselves to God, and God Himself tries to purify us to the extent that we are open. That is a long process that goes on. Without calling, the purification a purgative way or eliminative way, unitive way, without all these kinds of, stages, a person can always make progress. But what is important is, as Brother Lambert is saying, without that God experience, our prophetic experience it's not possible. To be a prophet is not possible. I don't say mystical experience, God experience is necessary. Somewhere some spiritual experience, some deep religious experience is necessary for a person to be authentic. Otherwise it is only action and action. Yeah, that's my humble suggestion, because I am not an expert, I am not a mystic. I'm not a mystic. But I can perceive when someone is a mystic, I can perceive easily this person is a God-oriented person. Yeah. But I think it is what? This experience of God is a must for us to be a prophet. To be a prophet. That's why I just said Martin Buber, I was quoting that. What is important is the vocation and mission. That is important, not about rapture, not about this or that. Vocation and mission.
Quality time spent in our midst by our beloved bishop, and it is informed that he is planning to leave this evening or tomorrow morning. So as a token of our appreciation and in memory of Tercentenary celebrations, Reverend Sister Lily, the Provincial Superior of the Daughters of Wisdom, would present to our Bishop memento. May I request Reverend Sister Lily to do the honor.
We have with us Dr. A.S. Dasan, Professor of English and author of 2 books, 4 monographs, and more than 60 researched articles. He is currently the Director of Shukrodaya Academy for Human Resource Development, Mysore, India. Formerly, he was the Chairperson, Department of Postgraduate Studies in English, and Founder Director, Center for Proficiency Development, University of Mysore. He has more than 30 years of teaching experience. He was part of the core group that prepared Vision 2025, University of Mysore, launched in 2010-11. Recipient of the Student of the Year 1988 prize, awarded by the Higher Education Council of Ireland, Dublin, for the highest distinction obtained in higher studies related to human development. Visiting Fellow 2004-2007 at the Annual International Conference on Migration and Culture Studies, organized by San Gallicano Institute, Rome, Italy, and authorized biographer of Mulk Raj Anand, nominated by the eminent writer himself, a project yet to be completed. As an activist, intellectual, his association with Shukrodaya Society, an NGO based in Mysore, has been since its launch in 1985. It is therein I met him in Mysore when I was doing my regency at Guru Mandir in our minor seminary, and he is associated in different levels with the Montfort Fathers. Montfort Fathers in India and from Germany, Italy and Ireland have been supporters of the social causes of Shukrodaya, especially the cause of rural education, education of street children and children from broken homes. We have with us Mrs. Nalini Xavier or Mrs. Dasan, Associate Professor of English and HOD, the Department of English at Theresian College for Women in Mysore, is the feminine face of relationship between Shukrodaya Society and Montfort Fathers. So their association has helped them also to drink the spirit of Montfort and to interpret the hymns of Montfort in our context today. The paper they are going to present has been titled as Questing for the Complete Man-Woman, the Hymnal Pilgrimage of St. Louis Marie de Montfort. So now I hand over the stage to Mr. or Dr. Dasan and Mrs. Dasan.
Very different way. I hope you will have the patience to appreciate that, intervene, interact if necessary in between the course of the presentation. We have listened to 3 important papers out of all the papers, very significant ones. One is from Brother John this morning, the inaugural, which set the pace for the kind of discussion, context-based discussion that has been on since this morning. And he gave us 10 initiatives in terms of the 4th century plan, and I may add one, not the 12th one. The 12th one may mean Judas, therefore we will limit ourselves only to 11, and maybe we will go on adding little more. The second paper was Peter. Peter brilliantly presented the historical, socio-cultural perspective of the Montfortian spirituality, the emergence of Montfortian spirituality. Particularly, he said one important thing, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. was replaced by Montfort as I love and therefore I am. But the present moment for us today, in the context of globalization, is no more cogito ergo sum, no more love, therefore I am, but it is sumo ergo sum. I eat and therefore I am. I consume and therefore I am. How much we eat, how much we possess, how much we are materialistically rich, how much we can arrive at that kind of economic salvation, that seems to be the criterion today. Against that, where is the meaning of cross? Where is the meaning of wisdom? Cross as wisdom, wisdom as cross. These are the questions that we can ask. I was very enamored by the three catchy phrases: honoring the past, treasuring the present, shaping the future. And Pope John Paul II very brilliantly spoke about Montfort's traditional spirituality as lived experience, as a lived tradition. And that's what Bishop Raja was speaking today, in particular in the concluding context, very, very emotively he expressed that idea, how he was a mystic, at the same time he was also a prophet in terms of his action. But in the context of globalization today, where commodification of life is a prime factor, what is happening is past has become a myth. Past has become a dead end. Past has become a kind of forgotten legacy. The present has become an anxiety. The present has become a terrible moment of conflict and tension. The present has become a moment of cultural, racial, religious divisions. And the future is an uncertainty. The future is an unknown phenomenon against which all of us have got our own arms. Where do we go? How do we go? How do we move from this spirituality? The wisdom and the cross going together in Montfortian spirituality can be compared to the kind of wisdom and the cross that Oscar Romero, the bishop, archbishop, spoke about in terms of the violence of love in his famous book, Violence of Love, the 88 pages, to which the introduction has been written by the one with whom you wanted to do your research, Henry Nowen. The pedagogical strategies of wisdom and the cross, which Montfort initiated in terms of radical evangelism, was in our paper that, as we are going to read, is a kind of pilgrimage, a journey as a motive, with triple motives going across, accompanied in this journey. And they are the Bible, the Magnificat, and the cross. The Bible, meaning the Word of God, God as the Word, incarnated in Christ, and therefore the cross, and the cross having the potentiality of violence against violence in terms of violence of love, in terms of epiphany of resurrection. And then in between, it was all anticipated, premeditated very beautifully by Mary, therefore the Magnificat. And the Magnificat gives us the clue how the radical evangelism of Montfort was attained to the cause of the poor. Therefore, if you look at the hymns of Montfort, the 164 hymns, written in 24,000 verses, 24,000 lines, all together, put together, Raja has been a friend of mine. In fact, I came to know about Montfort Fathers only because of this man called Raja. We are friends, we are classmates, we are batchmates, we were together, and I lived with him at Guru Mandir for about 3 years before my marriage, and we were together in every way possible. He initiated me into that kind of spirituality of Montfort Association. Later, many other fathers some of you are here, Peter is here, and few others are here. Some others are in Goa. Anthony Pereira is around here. I hope he is here. And Norbert, all others are here. Anil, everybody is here. And they have also introduced me to Gabriel brothers at ERCOD at different levels, and we have also initiated the kind of dialogue. The point I am saying is, Raja was speaking about Montfort did not write autobiography. If autobiography is an internal journey from within, in terms of critically reflecting upon the world, as a critical reflection, then all the 164 hymns may be treated as an arena of a semi-autobiography of Montfort, Louis de Montfort. If you look at all the hymns put together, they speak of all those themes, all those concerns the teachings of the church have been speaking till date. Everything. You can see him as a systematic theologian, you can see him as a doctor of the church, you can see him as a man making a journey through these three triple metaphors: the Word, the Bible, the Magnificat, and the cross, putting together in terms of incarnate wisdom. For him, the prior, the supreme expression of this journey lies in that cornerstone, namely incarnate wisdom. Wisdom born as an epiphanic manifestation in Christ who took the human form. God who took the human form in Christ. This Christocentric, not Mary-centric, Christocentric spirituality, of course highlighted, enlightened by the intervention of Mary, by the historic yes, as the two brother and sister, Gaffney and Rosemary have Gaffney, and two people have written the introduction to the hymns who would say, the historic yes that they gave, Mary gave to this journey of Christ in the human form is the same module, same mode of expression of the pilgrimage that Montfort is making towards this radical evangelism. This evangelism consists of three important dimensions. One, God as the dialogic other. God as the dialogic other. Here we would be using the Bakhtinian idea of chronotope, meaning the temporality and the word as a temporal agency and the context of temporality of God becoming man. This is the Bakhtinian approach to the intertextual reading of the hymns of Montfort that we are trying to do here as a pilgrimage. Number two, this spirituality that he pursues is always through Mary. Mary alive, Jesus alive. In history, on the cross, resurrection, that has given a continuity, and Raja was insisting on the continued presence of Jesus and continued presence of Mary this morning. This evening in his lecture, in his paper that he was reading about. Wonderful, wonderful ideas. Now, in the light of these small introductory remarks, we will straight away go to the paper, how we have put this paper, the hymns as Montfort's quest for the complete man, and that's the third dimension. The third dimension is whole journey of Montfort is an intertextual, dialogic, cross-cultural, cross-spiritual learning that has taken place upon impact of number of influences beyond his family, beyond his congregation, beyond all that can come from as the best sources on earth, all that has influenced him to create this journey, a multiple journey of multiple intelligences, but all converging towards. Therefore, his idea of salvation, redemptive action for himself, lies on his action for the cause of the poor. And that is the way he would mean totus, what? Totus tuus, God alone. God alone is not a withdrawal syndrome, as if the world is bad, the world is terrible, the world is horrendous, therefore neti neti tattvamasi, that's the Brahmanical idea, the Hindu Brahmanical idea of God. That is not his idea. His idea is an involvement, but involvement with the caution he gives against the five snares of the world. Five snares of the world, as he speaks in the hymn. Which are those snares? We'll come to that. Now I will give the mic to Nalini to go into the basic introductory part of the paper.
The hymns of Saint Louis de Montfort altogether around 164 in 23,000 verses, are a synchronic and synergic reflection on the dynamics of God-man relationship through the template and temporality of God's incarnate word manifest in compassionate action towards the world.
So three things we have put across. God is not an abstraction in this journey. God is in the form of human face of Christ, and that human face of God is in the form of compassion. Compassion is a sign of action. Compassion is a sign of action. And God becoming man is an aspect of mysticism. This is why Pope John insists, John Paul II insists, the mystic dimension of spirituality of Montfort and the ascetic tradition of the life experiences of Montfort. Therefore, he says, lived tradition, lived tradition. Montfort tradition is a lived tradition. Next.